Imagine discovering that the woman you love is only with you for your wealth. David heard it with his own ears, and instead of walking away, he set a trap so devastating it left her entire family in ruins. Subscribe, like, comment and watch till the ending to share this interesting story to family and friends. The soft glow of golden lamps filled the high-ceilinged restaurant where David sat nervously adjusting his tie. Tonight mattered. Across from him, Clara leaned forward with a warm smile, her eyes sparkling as she spoke about her dreams of travel, charity, and building a home filled with love. David couldn't stop admiring her. Her charm was disarming, her laughter effortless, and her presence felt like the answer to prayers he had whispered alone during his years of struggle. For a man who had pulled himself out of poverty and into the early stages of business success, Clara represented not just love, but the life he had always hoped was waiting for him. A waiter poured wine and Clara reached for David's hand. "You know, my parents are traditional. They sometimes misunderstand. But I don't care about all that. I care about you, David." Her words pierced his heart like honey. He believed her, how could he not? For weeks she had stood by him, applauded his efforts, and insisted that money wasn't what made a man worthy. She made him feel seen more than his balance sheet ever had. Later that month, David was invited to Clara's family home for dinner. It was an elegant house with marble floors and a chandelier that could swallow a modest apartment whole. Mr. and Mrs. Edwards greeted him with practiced politeness, though their eyes betrayed subtle judgment. "So, David," her father said, swirling his wine glass, "what exactly is it that you do again?" "I run a growing logistics company," David replied, steady but respectful. "It started small, but we've managed to expand into 3 cities already." Her mother gave a smile too tight to be sincere. "Oh, how nice." David noticed the faint exchange of glances between Clara's parents, but Clara quickly placed her hand over his, squeezing gently as if to reassure him that he belonged. Through the evening he worked hard to charm them, to prove he wasn't just a dreamer chasing a mirage. When dessert was served, Clara leaned into him, whispering softly, "Don't worry. They'll come around. They just don't know you yet the way I do." That night, David left with his heart full. He was convinced he had found a woman who loved him despite the silent walls of wealth her family hid behind. He couldn't imagine that the same love he celebrated would soon become the cruelest deception of his life. The night air was crisp, laced with the faint scent of blooming jasmine as David parked his car in front of Clara's family estate. He had just left after a long dinner, but halfway home, he realized he had forgotten his leather briefcase, filled with contracts he needed for a meeting the next morning. Reluctantly he turned back. The Edwards mansion was still alive with soft light streaming from tall windows. As he approached the door, he reached for his phone to call Clara, but paused when he heard voices drifting through the half-open veranda doors. He recognized them instantly, Mr. and Mrs. Edwards speaking with Clara. "Clara, you must not lose focus," her mother's sharp voice cut the air. "Don't forget why you're really with David. You're there for the money, nothing else." David froze. His chest tightened. Clara's father added, his tone more commanding, "We didn't raise you to marry for love. Love won't pay the bills. That man has potential, yes, but he's still new to wealth. Secure the marriage, secure the inheritance, and later, if you wish, you can move on. Just make sure you get your footing first." David's ears burned. He waited for Clara to defend him, to say they were wrong, to shout that she loved him. But instead, silence stretched, and then Clara's voice came, calm, almost resigned. "I know, Dad. I know, Mom," she whispered. "I'll do what I need to do. I won't forget." The words were knives. David staggered back a step, the weight of betrayal pressing down on him. His hand shook against the cold metal of the briefcase handle. Every memory of Clara's soft laughter, her gentle reassurances, her hand resting warmly on his, all at once felt tainted, cheap, staged. He could have stormed in then, exposed her hypocrisy, demanded an explanation. But something stopped him. It wasn't just pain, it was clarity. He realized in that instant that if he confronted her tonight, she might spin another web of lies, perhaps even succeed in fooling him again. No, he needed to be smarter. David silently withdrew, leaving the briefcase where it was. He climbed back into his car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mind replayed the scene again and again. The coldness in her voice, the absence of hesitation, the ease with which she admitted she was using him. The drive home felt endless. Inside his apartment, he collapsed into his chair, staring at the city lights outside. Anger boiled, but beneath it burned a steadier flame, resolve. If Clara and her parents thought he was a naive fool blinded by love, they had underestimated him. He whispered to himself almost as a vow. They want me for my money? Then I'll give them exactly what they're looking for, until the moment it destroys them. And with that, David began to plot his quiet, calculated revenge. Morning light streamed into David's apartment, but he hadn't slept. His mind was a storm, yet within that storm clarity sharpened like glass. He had a choice: confront Clara and end everything in one fiery outburst, or play along, let her believe she was winning and strike when the mask was at its weakest. David chose the latter. Over the next few weeks he slipped seamlessly into his role. To Clara, he was still the devoted fiancé, the man who listened to her stories, brought her flowers and smiled as though nothing was wrong. When she laughed, he laughed with her. When she leaned into his shoulder, he allowed himself to feel the sting of betrayal but never let it show on his face. But behind closed doors, David was a different man. At his office he called in his lawyer and financial advisor. Quietly he began transferring his assets into an irrevocable trust, placing everything under legal protection. He restructured company ownership so that on paper, his fortune seemed modest, even unstable. To the outside world, it appeared as though David's empire was slipping. Contracts delayed, expansion plans failing, investments going wrong. The Edwards family, always watchful, noticed. Clara began dropping subtle hints during their dates. "David," she said one evening, stirring her wine with a distracted air, "I've heard some rumors. Your company, is it really doing well? You'd tell me if things were bad, right?" David smiled faintly, reaching for her hand. "Don't worry about me, Clara. I always land on my feet." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Days turned into months and Clara grew more impatient. She started pushing him toward marriage quicker than before, suggesting lavish venues and extravagant plans, as if a wedding could lock in her security. David agreed to everything with a calm nod, never once hinting that he knew her secret. At the same time he began to observe her more closely. The way she lit up only when expensive gifts were mentioned. The subtle irritation when he suggested a quiet evening instead of a glamorous outing. The glances she exchanged with her parents whenever finances came up. Every detail confirmed the truth of what he had overheard. One evening, David stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie for a charity gala. He studied his reflection, the calm mask he had perfected. Behind the mask, however, was the man who was no longer fooled, no longer blinded by love. "They think I'm theirs to play with," he thought. "But every move they make is leading them closer to the fall." At the gala, Clara clung to his arm, smiling for the cameras. To the world, they looked like a golden couple destined for greatness. But as David's eyes flickered toward her parents across the room, he allowed himself the smallest, coldest smile. The trap was set. All that remained was the perfect moment to spring it. The grand hall shimmered under chandeliers, their light bouncing off crystal glasses and polished silver. It was David and Clara's first wedding anniversary, and he had spared no expense, or so it seemed. Clara had personally insisted on the event being grand, a celebration attended by her family, influential friends, and business associates. To her, it was an opportunity to flaunt her successful marriage. To David, it was the stage for his revelation. The guests laughed, mingled, and toasted. Clara glowed in a red satin dress, dazzling everyone with her charm. She leaned toward David at the head table and whispered, "See? Look at all this. We're untouchable." David smiled, but his eyes were steady, calculating. "Yes," he said softly. "We are." When the dinner wound down, David rose to his feet, gently tapping his glass. The room quieted. All eyes turned to him. Clara's smile widened, assuming he was about to give a glowing toast in her honor. "Thank you all for being here tonight," David began, his voice calm, steady, almost tender. "A year ago I believed I was the luckiest man alive. I had found love, real love, or so I thought. Tonight I want to share a story. My story." A ripple of curiosity spread across the guests. Clara's brow furrowed slightly, but she kept smiling. David continued, his gaze sweeping the room. "Some months ago, after a family dinner, I returned to this very house to retrieve a forgotten briefcase. That's when I overheard a conversation that changed everything." The crowd leaned forward. Clara's hand tightened around her glass. David paused, then pressed a small remote in his pocket. Hidden speakers crackled to life. The room filled with voices, Mr. and Mrs. Edwards' unmistakable tones. "Don't forget why you're really with David. You're there for the money, nothing else." Gasps erupted. Faces turned toward Clara, who sat frozen, her face draining of color. Then her own voice followed, clear and cold. "I know, Dad. I know, Mom. I'll do what I need to do. I won't forget." The hall fell into stunned silence. Clara shot to her feet, trembling. David, this isn't what it sounds like. You don't understand. But David didn't flinch. His voice remained calm, almost sorrowful. I understood perfectly. And that's when I decided to play along. He turned to the crowd. What no one here knows is that the wealth Clara and her parents thought they were securing never belonged to her. My assets were protected, my fortune secured in trust. Every display of struggle they saw was part of my plan. Murmurs filled the air. Some looked at Clara with pity, others with disgust. David raised his glass. So tonight I announce something new. A large portion of my fortune will be going into a scholarship foundation under my late mother's name. It will help young people who actually understand the value of sacrifice, honesty, and love. Applause broke out among the guests, though hushed, uncertain. Clara's parents looked as though the ground had disappeared beneath them. Clara, shaking, tried to grab David's arm. Please don't do this, we can fix it. David pulled away, his voice quiet but final. I gave you love. You gave me betrayal. My revenge isn't to ruin you, it's to set myself free. The room erupted with whispers as David set down his glass, turned, and walked out, leaving Clara crumbling in front of the very people she had wanted to impress. The following morning the tabloids were merciless. Photos from the anniversary dinner had already spread, Clara's pale face, David standing calm with a glass in hand, guests covering their mouths in shock. Headlines screamed betrayal and scandal. Socialite exposed, marriage for money backfires. Businessman David Cole outs in-laws in shocking public reveal. By noon, Clara's pristine reputation was in tatters. Sponsors withdrew her from charity boards, friends stopped returning her calls, and whispers followed her every step. For her parents it was worse. Their names were now associated with greed, manipulation, and humiliation. Clara locked herself inside her parents' mansion for days, weeping and raging. She sent David dozens of messages, pleas, apologies, threats, but he never replied. Every ring of her phone was met with silence. David, meanwhile, felt something he hadn't in months: peace. In his office, sunlight poured across his desk as he signed the final documents establishing the Margaret Cole Foundation, named after his late mother. Millions of dollars were dedicated to scholarships for underprivileged students, a cause his mother had always dreamed of supporting. His advisors warned him that tying his wealth to charity instead of keeping it in personal accounts was unusual, but David only smiled. This isn't about money, he said. It's about doing something real. Later that week he walked through one of the foundation's first sponsored schools, a modest building where children in worn uniforms beamed as they received new textbooks. Their gratitude, untainted and pure, filled David's chest with a warmth he hadn't felt since before Clara's betrayal. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, David stood on his balcony overlooking the city. For the first time, the skyline didn't remind him of battles fought or fortunes earned, it reminded him of possibilities. He had lost nothing really. Instead, he had shed the weight of false love and found strength in truth. Clara, on the other hand, spiraled. Gossip painted her as a gold digger exposed by her own greed. She tried confronting David once outside his office, tears streaking her face. David, please, she sobbed, clutching at his arm. I was pressured, I didn't mean it, I love you. But David gently removed her hand, his eyes steady, free of anger but also free of affection. You loved what I could give you, Clara. Not me. And that's something I can never forgive. She crumbled on the sidewalk as he walked inside, cameras flashing, recording her downfall. In time, Clara would fade into obscurity, whispers at cocktail parties, a cautionary tale of greed and betrayal. Her parents retreated from society, their once polished family name permanently stained. But David? He rose higher than ever. His foundation grew, his businesses flourished, and his reputation as a man of integrity drew powerful allies. And those scars of betrayal lingered, they became reminders, not wounds. One night, looking at the city lights, David whispered the words he once vowed in anger, but now with a calm certainty. They thought they broke me. But all they did was set me free. And for the first time in years he smiled, not with bitterness but with peace. Subscribe, like, comment and share for more interesting stories.